Hey, Giants fans, this is Chris Franklin from NJ Advanced Media, and welcome to Talk is Cheap podcast, the show where we discuss all things related to the New York Giants. Now, before we begin, I want to remind you that you can read all of our content on NJ.com/Giants and make sure to bookmark that to get the latest Giants news and analysis. Well, for the first time this season, we saw the Giants in a victory formation after they went to Cleveland and beat the Browns 21-15. We saw one player take a huge step in their development while the defense kept Deshaun Watson in check. There isn't a lot of time for the Giants to dwell on the game because they have a Thursday night matchup against the Dallas Cowboys, which we'll get into a little bit later. But now I'm going to go to my Talk is Cheap co-host, Darryl Slater. Darryl, how are you doing today?
Pretty good, Chris. Yeah, and the Giants got a much-needed win on Sunday, certainly, and now it's onward to Dallas for them.
Yeah, it's crazy. Who would have? It feels weird because they did start out the game, and you look, it's like, oh, great, it's going to be one of those games. And next thing you know, you turn around, the scoreboard's like, interesting. You find that out. We'll get to talk into that in a sec, but we're going to start off with our kickoff question. And the question I want to ask you, Darryl, is: was this win a sign that the Giants can be a decent team, or was it more that the Browns were really bad?
No, I don't think it was a sign that the Giants can be a decent team. I mean, the Browns are a flawed team, and the Giants played one really good half and pretty much did not much, especially on offense after halftime. So, the Browns have a lot of issues. Deshaun Watson is obviously not worth what might wind up being the worst contract in the history of professional sports. But it was certainly progress for the Giants. It was an ugly win, but you know what? This is a team that's, if it's going to win any games this year, they're going to be ugly, and that's fine. They shouldn't apologize for that. There was a resilient win. Started out with like two just unheard of type plays, right? You fumble the opening kickoff, next play touchdown, boom, boom, right? Just like that. And the message from the Giants players on the sideline was, since we're not going to drop F-bombs on here, but you can fill it in. It was F it, basically, they said on the sideline to each other and just move on, basically, was the message. And they did. And they got their stuff together. It would have been very easy for, and certainly understandable for an 0-2 team to really spiral from there. It looked like they were just teetering on this season, going down the drain. And look, again, they're 1-2. They still have two tough games left. If they're 1-4, no one's going to care that they won in Cleveland. They have to build on this, but this does give them a starting point, and that's certainly better than the alternative.
Yeah, because when you look at this starting 0-3 and then you go into Cleveland, and to be honest, I thought Cleveland would probably win that division just heading into the season when you look at their defense and the way that you think Deshaun Watson, maybe he turned things around, but yes, they might be picking ahead of the Giants this year, and that's saying something in terms of that. But I'll move on to one person who was very instrumental in that win, and to me, I still don't know how he made that catch in that game, but it's Malik Neighbors. He's still it's crazy. It's still in my mind on there. But he was the focal point of the Giants' passing attack. He was targeted 12 times, finished with 8 catches for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. Darryl, why was he more effective this week?
Well, he was pretty effective in week 2 as well. In Washington, they targeted him a ton in that game, but this was a definite breakout game for him in terms of now the yardage wasn't as robust as it was in week 2 in Washington, but he had that outstanding catch that set up a couple plays later. And also great, but not as great catch, but again, great touchdown, the first touchdown. That was a huge turning point in the game. I mean, this is a season-saving win, and that was a game-changing play, and that's why they drafted this kid 6 overall. And I think everyone sees the physical. I mean, I know everyone sees the physical skills that he has and the ability to go up and make contested catches, and the reasons why the Giants receivers coach Mike Groh kind of did refer to him as a 5-tool receiver, in that he can make contested catches, he can run go routes, right? And he can yards after the catch, like all the various things that a really good receiver can do, not just the guy who's necessarily labeled like one-dimensional. Well, that's why you pick a receiver 6 overall. But on top of that, I think people are starting to, if they're really paying attention to what's said after the games, see his just his acumen as far as being able to read the game and do so early in his career. And he's a really young kid. He's 21 and just turned 21. And so what happened was last week during practice, Malik Neighbors had noticed that the cornerback there, 23, I forget his name, Martin Emerson, I believe, and he tended to, based on what Malik Neighbors saw in film, undercut routes, right? So this ties into the touchdown, the first touchdown, the leaping grab he made. And he suggested Malik Neighbors suggested to Brian Dable, hey, why don't we run this particular play, right? And it would work well against what this guy tends to do. Dable said, okay, let's take a look at the film. He's like, you know what, you're right. Let's work it in practice. And they did, and they felt confident about it, and they called it. So that's a case of a kid, a young man who is really got a great eye at this early in his career for the game. And that's on top of all the rest of it, why he could be certainly a special player. Still a ways to go, but the early returns are obviously outstanding.
Nice. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I like the way that he's able to bounce back. I like the way his mentality that, especially when you see receivers high pointing balls and everything else like that, instead of letting the ball come into the chest and bounce off like we see so many. I don't know if it's a trend going on with some of these younger guys, but I like the way that he fights. He goes up to the high point of it and brings it in there. And yeah, Giants have a special one, I think, inside there. Now, one thing there was an issue with on both sides, it looked like fumbles. A lot of fumbles in that game, but especially when it's concerning, it was inopportune times for Giants running back Devin Singletary. We know he's the lead back and he's the lead back there, but do you think this is a one-off game for him, or is this something that you think should be concerning going forward? And if so, how much could Tyrone Tracy Jr. eat into his touches?
Well, I mean, he had a lost fumble in Washington the week before, so it's 2 straight weeks now that he has lost a fumble, and the Giants obviously lost one of those games in close fashion. So this is something he has to get cleaned up. I don't think Tyrone Tracy I don't think you're going to see it anytime soon where he'll be taking more touches away from Devin Singletary. And Singletary has played well at times. You saw him make the really smart play at the end of that game, sliding instead of going for the touchdown, which anyone who bet the over was very mad at him for that. But it was the right play. But he obviously, Devin Singletary just has to get that cleaned up. And Ryan Novozinski, who is now doing a great job with us covering the Giants along with me, he wrote for today, he wrote a thing on Singletary today that wasn't just about the funny reaction to teammates giving him crap for the way he slid. It was, again, they were saying it was the right play, but they were joking with him about the over under. But also that story ties into the issues he's had with fumbling. And if you look at the fumbles so far this year, as I'll go through it here. And I'll find it as we're talking. But this is not a new thing for him. Now, I don't think it's going to lead to him getting demoted, but it's certainly something that they cannot have continue, given given the fact that their offense is a very small margin for error. So it's 2 fumbles this year, and he had 1 last year, 5 the year before in Buffalo in 2022. In 2021, no, I'm reading it wrong. So he had 2 this year, 1 last year in Houston. Okay. In 2022 in Buffalo, he had 3, and then he had 5 in 2021. 1 and then 4 in his first year in Buffalo. So 16 career fumbles, which is a decent amount. I mean, that's a fairly high number, and already 2 through 3 games is certainly not ideal. That is what PFF has him for, when he's rushing, which I think would also account for any receiving fumbles he had, but I don't. They kind of put all that under one category. So that's where his total fumbles fall. Certainly he's going to run the ball most of the time. But actually, you know what? I was wrong. He has 3 fumbles as a receiver, and all of those came in 2021. But still, again, he's carrying the ball most of the time. That's his job, right? And you can't afford to have a guy so that gives him 3 and 15. So he has 3 and 16. So he has 19 career fumbles, 16 as a runner. And that's just not something you want. I mean, again, he's been in the league now. This is 6 years. So you're talking about spread out over a period of time. But all the Giants are really worried about right now is 2 and 3 weeks, back-to-back weeks here, can't continue. And he knows that.
Yeah, it's one thing. It comes to the when you look at that, a guy his veteran stature, you wonder, like, he'd go through all these running back coaches. And he's like, okay, hold the ball this way, hold the ball this way. He's still not able to do that. Kind of concerning. I don't know. I know some guys' running styles are a little weird, and sometimes they prefer the loaf of bread thing. I mean, remember Sean McCoy and some other guys that just like, oh yeah, let me put the ball like I have my chicken wing out there and just start running around like doing. They're still effective to do that. I don't know what it is. Like you can try to tell him, and it's one of those things where you feel like at this point he's setting his ways, and you're just wait. It's almost like you're waiting at times. Like okay, it's coming. When is it going to strike? And please don't let it be in the red zone if you're the Giants in terms of that. But I just don't. It's tough for me, like especially for a guy that way. So like, just hold on to the ball. I know you're getting hit all which ways, but you play running back, cradle the ball, and you don't see as many other guys around the league happen to them. So I don't know. You just kind of hope that it sticks right there. It doesn't pop up its real ugly head, especially coming up here on Thursday night. And it's still hard. It's hard to believe that we're already week 4, but the Cowboys are coming to MetLife Stadium, and the Cowboys have their own issues after being blown out by the Saints and losing to the Ravens last week. A lot of their scoring came in the second half, and they mounted a comeback, surprising comeback. I thought that game was over. Next thing you know, it was like, okay. It made it a lot closer. Scores a lot closer to what it really was, and they had to ride the arm of Dak Prescott in order to be able to get into that position. Now the Giants, they have a couple of injury issues right now. Drew Phillips, he didn't practice. Adoree Jackson, he also didn't practice as well too. Darryl, how the heck do they stop these Cowboys wide receiving core if their guys are banged up?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're looking at a desperate Cowboys team, back-to-back home losses at 1-2, having won 16 straight home games before that. So this is kind of different territory for them, and the Giants' biggest task here will be handling CeeDee Lamb, who has had some hiccups this year. I know the body language issues that he had last week, and he apologized for that. But again, a great player, and the Giants have a number 1 cornerback in Deonte Banks, who's early in his second year, who is far from proving himself as being a legit number 1 corner. I mean, he just straight up has not played well this year, and certainly last week did not play well. Amari Cooper handled well. You saw where Justin Jefferson in week 1 did a nice job against Deonte Banks. This is got to be a big concern for the Giants. I no doubt. I mean, he is, regardless of injuries, he is their number 1 corner. I mean, so who do you have that's going to be able to handle CeeDee Lamb, or do you have to try to cover him by committee, right, with zone coverage or whatever, double team? And so that's the question they're going to have to figure out here. And so on top of the unknown factor about Deonte Banks, as in, is this guy actually ever going to be a legit number 1 corner or prove himself against receivers like Justin Jefferson, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb? By the way, CeeDee Lamb just absolutely roasted Deonte Banks in the second game between the Cowboys and Giants last year. Banks didn't cover him in the opener. Then Banks got hurt and only played half the second game. But when he was in, it was a disaster. Lamb just ran all over him. And Lamb would just destroy the Giants in that game, 151 yards. And so no answers for him last year. Will they have answers for him this year? Well, look, I mean, now they have to also figure out their corner situation. Drew Phillips, 3rd-round rookie, pretty impressive so far. He's their starting slot corner, obviously. Adoree Jackson is a name, but he's a key backup. Right. So like, would it really matter? I mean, they're both dealing with calf injuries. You'd like to have Adoree Jackson, but the issue becomes here, what do they do in the slot? And so no Drew Phillips, he's not playing. Adoree Jackson's not playing. Right. So they didn't practice Monday, Tuesday. They're not playing. All right. So what do you do in the slot? So that you take Cordale Flott and move him. He can play in the slot. He did play in the slot last year, but he's their starting outside corner opposite Banks right now. The good news for the Giants is they have Nick McLeod coming back from a sprained MCL, missed the last couple games. He can play in the slot or outside. So do you take McLeod and just put him in the slot? I think that's the most likely thing. Or do you take McLeod, put him outside, and then move Flott into the slot? I think what they'll probably wind up doing is obviously Banks. Then they'll have Flott outside, and then you put McLeod in the slot. But certainly losing Drew Phillips and also losing Adoree Jackson to those calf injuries puts a dent in their ability to adjust if there's even another injury. I think they could probably get by with what they have. McLeod's, I would say, perhaps a downgrade in the slot from Drew Phillips. But the bottom line is there's no excuses here. I mean, you still have Banks, a guy who's supposed to be your number 1 corner. Go out and defend CeeDee Lamb at least to some level of competence. That's what it comes down to. I don't want to hear these excuses about their defense or their secondary being banged up when you have the guy you drafted 24th overall last year to be your number 1 corner. So let's see it from Banks. He keeps saying he's confident, but at some point the production needs to match that stated confidence, as I wrote for it this morning.
Well said. Well said. And And I'll put you in the defensive coordinator's chair now. You mentioned a little bit. We were just talking about how they have those potential secondary issues. But then you have Dak Prescott. He's only completing 60.7% of his passes. He's 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Are you bringing more pressure than normal to try to cover up that secondary? Or do you feel like if you try to blitz them, do you think they were exposed? Do you think the Giants will actually be able to get home in order to put that pressure on? Because we do have seen he'll get in these spurts. Well, he'll turn the ball over, in next or for a strip sack, whether it's for the interception side. Would you blitz Dak Prescott more and put more pressure on than you normally would with this team?
I think you have to understand too that this is a really experienced quarterback who might be able to handle that. I mean, if you look at last week, they were able to play with the lead. The Giants were against Deshaun Watson, which gives you a lot of ability to have your pass rusher certainly be more effective in Brian Burns than he was in the first couple of weeks, right? It all, of course, he's going to have more opportunities, right? So I think that people look at how Burns played great last week. Yeah, he did, but they played with the lead, and that all ties in, right? And if you stop the run, play with the lead, your pass rushers can be more effective. They were able to 47 dropbacks for Deshaun Watson last week. They blitzed him on 25 of those, so they did blitz quite a bit. And overall, they pressured him 21 times, and 14 of those 21 pressures came when they blitzed. So they blitzed a lot. They got a lot of pressures overall. And a lot of those pressures came when they blitzed, if that all makes sense, right? So as you narrow down kind of the Venn diagram of that, is 25 blitzes in 47 opposing quarterback dropbacks something that you'll see a lot from Shane Bowen? I don't necessarily think so. He is not a blitz heavy guy like Wink Martindale was. But last week certainly lays an interesting template for what could be something they might do in terms of cranking up the aggressiveness if they get a lead. I mean, remember, we're talking about how important that Malik Neighbors touchdown was. I mean, that happened late in the second quarter, minute 44 to go. They go up 14-7. Then they get the ball back and they go up 21-7 on another Malik Neighbors touchdown pass, right? Going into halftime, right? So they weren't playing from behind for really for some of they were down 7 points for like some of this first quarter, most of the first quarter, but they weren't up significantly behind for any of that game. And so they were able to keep the Browns to a point where the Browns had to keep, dropping back and throwing the ball. And certainly in the second half, they had to. So if you can play with a 7-point lead or more, I mean, then yeah, maybe I think you see a situation where they really go after Dak Prescott. But I think in general, you'll see a more measured approach from Shane Bowen in close, normal game situations than he did from Wink Martindale in terms of the blitzing. At some point, your cornerbacks need to cover. Like, I don't care how much you blitz or whatever. At some point, Deonte Banks needs to show he's up to the task against CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, he really does. Now we're going to switch to the other side of the ball. Now, Giants offense are going to have to face linebacker Micah Parsons, and for Parsons, this has been a surprisingly slow start. He only has 1 sack this season, and we know the bugaboos about the Giants' offensive line. Darryl, do you think that they can at least hold them in check? Because when you look at the Cowboys and some of the other defensive lineouts, guys like the defensive tackle Mozzie Smith, they're not truly making a true impact. So do you think the Giants are going to be able to at least slow down Micah Parsons?
Tall order. You're talking about their pass rush. They're still 11th in PFF and pass rush, probably not as high as where they'd like to be. This Giants offensive line has been okay. They're 21st in pass blocking at this point. In terms of run blocking, they're 30th. So I think still a work in progress for the Giants offensive line wise. They did not pass block well in Cleveland. They did in the first 2 games pass block quite well. And so that was really the game where it didn't go great for them. If you just go by PFF grades, they had a 36 pass block grade PFF wise in Cleveland. So that's poor. You can't, that's not sustainable. Now, Myles Garrett is an absolute freak, obviously. So that's going to tie into that. So you understand that, like, when you play a guy like that, he's going to get some opportunities, and he did. And so if you look at, their pressures allowed in that game, it was not a great game for Andrew Thomas, maybe the worst game of his career. I mean, he allowed 8 pressures in that game, which is wild. I mean, that's very much unheard of. And you saw some times where Myles Garrett was getting the better of him in terms of the Cleveland pass rush. Like I talked about how well Myles Garrett played. He had 9 pressures. He played his butt off. And so other than that, they didn't have a lot of impact pass. No one else had more than 3 pressures. But again, Myles Garrett, 3 hits, 6 hurries, no sacks. Still 3 hits, 6 hurries. It's a lot of pressure. So what do? Do they try to double team block Micah Parsons? That's certainly a possibility. I mean, he is right up there with Myles Garrett as one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. So that's the guy you have to account for defensively. So we'll see. I think this is a huge test for the Giants offensive line, considering, I mean, everyone remembers how they just got absolutely wrecked last year in the opener and in the second game. But certainly that opener setting such a horrible tone for the season. You talk about their pass block grade in that game, 35-4. I mean, they just got destroyed. Some of that, of course, owing to Evan Neal, who's not starting anymore. In terms of those pressures allowed, he allowed 8. Mark Lewinsky allowed 9. Those guys aren't here anymore. So they allowed 27 pressures in those games. Most of them from guys who aren't here anymore. But one of whom's not starting, the other one's not with the Giants anymore. So this is a big test to see how much better they are with the guys who replace those guys, which is John Runyon on the inside at guard and Jermaine Illuminor at right tackle.
And now we know all these division games, there's always a rivalry with each one. We look, whether it's Commanders, the Cowboys, the Eagles, what have you, it's always a heightened sense. And there's not to steal from the SEC, it just means more in the terms of that. Darryl, do you think the Cowboys are still the Giants' biggest rival? Do you think there's another rivalry that's bigger than Cowboys Giants? And what's your thoughts on that?
In terms of the Giants rivalries, or
in terms of Giants rivalry, yeah. Who do you think they're the biggest rivals?
Yeah, I would say. Well, look, I mean, I think a guy I used to work with years ago had a great line about this was regarding the Virginia Tech rivalry, right? When Virginia Tech was winning a lot of those games. Again, this may be out of the purview of people who follow the Giants per se. Again, one team was beating the other a lot. Virginia Tech was beating UVA a lot, and he had a line in his column saying this rivalry is like the rivalry between the hammer and the nail. I mean, it's a very cheesy dad joke, but hey, look,
it's a good one.
It's amusing. It's so in terms of that, right? Well, the Giants have played very poorly against both the Cowboys and the Eagles lately, as everyone knows. But 6 straight losses for the Giants to the Cowboys, including 49-17 and 40-0 last year. And the Giants won in 2021 at home against the Cowboys, well, rather 2020, the calendar year 2021, end of the 2020 season. But before that, they had lost 7 straight games. So they've lost 13 of 14 to this team. So not much of a rivalry lately. I would say probably right now, the Eagles, again, even I think both these teams have superior talent to the Giants. There's probably a little more, a bunch more hatred with the Eagles, just if only because of the Saquon Barkley factor, the geographic proximity, the fact that the Eagles have had these have won the Super Bowl recently and just have been playing better than the Cowboys in the postseason. Eagles fans here can kind of rub that in Giants fans' faces. That certainly down where you live in South Jersey, where there's a cross section there of Giants and Eagles fans crossing over. So yeah, I would probably say the Eagles right now, but the Giants, if they can beat this flawed, desperate Dallas team on Thursday, maybe they inject a little bit of actual rivalry back into the rivalry, what should be a rivalry, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because whenever it always works best. And I'm sorry, I miss the days where you had 3 or 4. Like I look at 2022 when you say what you will about the Giants and that run. I thought that was one of the highest point, the best the NFC East has been in a very long time. When you get legit chances that any team can beat any other team, and I look at this game coming up. And especially with the Cowboys being on a short rest, having to travel, something that's very rare. Like whoever makes this, the guys that make the computers that make the schedules. I wonder if they have a couple stars in there in their computer chips, wherever they store whatever stuff they have on there too. Because the fact they have never had to travel on a road on a Thursday is pretty crazy, including Thanksgiving, which they always host. But that's a whole other topic in terms of that.
No, that's interesting because I saw our sister site, Lone Star Live out of Texas, posted something on our site about that. And it kind of, while explaining it, right, so they've never, people understand, right, like you're not, I don't think the NFL will ever has teams go road, Sunday, Thursday. So you're usually going road, home, or home, road, okay? So what they're saying there is like the Cowboys have never gone home road for a Thursday night. They've gone road home because they play on Thanksgiving. So that's part of it, though. They play on Thanksgiving, and what the NFL has typically done is put their Thursday game after the Thanksgiving game, giving them a full week of rest. So by the default of them having to have, I guess, 2 Thursday games every year because they play on Thanksgiving and they play at home on Thanksgiving, that's sort of the reason behind that. But I think I saw a stat in that story that said, and again, you're talking about the franchise and the uniform having never done this. I'm sure there are players on this team who are elsewhere who have done this, right? It's not like these guys have played literally all 10 years for the Cowboys, but the stat here was all the other NFL teams have played at least 6 road games on a Thursday night after playing the previous Sunday, which is really, it's an interesting quirk. So even Detroit has done it, which Detroit always plays at home on Thanksgiving, right? So you'd think there's not an exact parallel there. Anyway, but the point being, so Dak Prescott's never done it. That would be the main one there. But no matter how you slice it, this is a Cowboys team that looks beatable. But again, I think you look at that second half for the Giants on Sunday. If they play like that for stretches of this game, they're not winning.
That's very, very true. And finally, here's our overtime question for today. Darryl, if the Giants win this game, do you think that the Giants fans should get their hopes up that this team could be better this season than anticipated if they win this game? And if they do win this game, what do you think the ceiling would be?
Yes, they should get their hopes up. I mean, this would be an excellent win. I mean, they lost as a 6.5-point underdog, I believe it was, in Cleveland. The Giants, I think, are 6-point underdogs in this game. Yeah, shoot, absolutely. I don't care like how flawed the Cowboys are, but given the low expectations for the Giants coming into this year, given how bad they looked in week 1 and how inventing ways to lose they looked in week 2 in Washington, the line actually I guess is 5.5 right now for this game, but still, again, this would be a significant win. So given all those things, that would, to me, and it was 6.5 in Cleveland, like I said, that would definitely, and you should be, very pleased and get your hopes up. Oh, absolutely. You should be very happy if the Giants win this game. They get extra rest going to Seattle, which is undefeated right now. Long trip, obviously, but again, extra rest, and you're coming off a home game. So you just go home, get in your bed, and get that extra rest going into the Seattle trip. And that's a challenge. But what would the ceiling be at 2-2? I don't know. I mean, I picked them to win 6 games. So I think that there's still a world in which they win fewer than that. I mean, they have 1 win right now, and they still have to go to Seattle, host the Bengals. I know the Bengals are really flailing right now, but still. Then they host the Eagles, who have been, again, the Eagles, they've had some warts this year, but look, their talent level is significantly better than the Giants. And the Giants go to Pittsburgh. So to close out October, they don't really get a reprieve until the start of November. Commanders, then Panthers and Munich, and then the bye. So this next 5-game stretch, or really, I guess, 4 after the Dallas game, I think could certainly make or break their season. And now by make, you're talking about just being relevant, right? You're not talking about a team that's going to contend for the Super Bowl. I mean, I think if this team wins 7 games, it's a big, big victory. It's a big victory. So if they get to 2 here and you look at the rest of their schedule, okay, you think that they can probably beat Washington. They would have beat Washington if they hadn't botched the kicker situation. They can probably beat Carolina. Then there's some toughies down the stretch. I mean, Tampa, then Dallas again, then the Saints, the Ravens. So they get Atlanta and the Colts. So again, you're still looking at a world in which they could only peak out at 6 wins, even if they start 2-2, I think. But what's their ceiling? I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 wins, but we're getting way ahead of ourselves here because they played one good half against a flawed Browns team, and they held on in the second half. They kept inviting the Browns back into that game, and the Browns didn't accept the invitation. And so they got to play a lot better on Thursday night, tomorrow night.
Oh, you're always good and you're always insightful, Darryl. Thank you once again for joining us here on this podcast. You're always good on this one. So it's always great talking to you. And that, guys, make sure you read Darryl's work and also Ryan Nowozinski's work on NJ.com/Giants. They'll have a lot of coverage going in for tomorrow's game against the Cowboys. And guess what? We'll be back here next week to recap it all as well, too. So for Darryl, I'm Chris. Everybody have a good one. See ya.